Dad left the house to both of us, but I'm the executor, and I've decided to sell. You have until Sunday to clear out your things. I've already changed the gate code. That is exactly what my brother said to me 48 hours after we lowered our father into the ground. He didn't call. He didn't come to the door. He texted it. One paragraph. No punctuation at the end, like it was a grocery list. I stared at the screen for a long time, standing in my father's kitchen, wearing the same black dress I had worn to the funeral, still smelling like the lilies they had piled onto his casket. My brother wasn't alone in this. I knew that. His wife had been circling my father's estate for 2 years, ever since the Parkinson's diagnosis made the tremors in his hands noticeable enough for strangers to see. She started showing up at Sunday dinners with printed articles about aging in place and asset protection strategies. She brought a casserole dish every time, like the food was a cover charge for the conversation she actually came to have. I read the text again. I had until Sunday. It was Friday. I set my phone face down on the counter and looked out the window at the backyard, at the oak tree my father had planted the year I was born. I didn't scream. I didn't call him back. I walked to the garage, found the box of legal files my father kept on the metal shelf above his workbench, and I started reading. Something didn't add up, and I needed to find out what. My father was meticulous. 31 years as a civil engineer had made him that way. He kept copies of everything, cross-referenced, dated, labeled in his careful block print. The box in the garage held tax returns going back to 1987, insurance policies, the deed to the house, and the original will he had drafted when my mother was still alive. I spread the documents across the kitchen table and read through all of it. The will was dated 11 years ago. It was clean and simple. The house and all remaining assets were to be split equally between my brother and me. There was a handwritten addendum from 3 years later, after my mother passed, reconfirming the same split. My father's signature on both was firm and deliberate, each letter distinct. Then I found the third document, tucked into a manila folder I didn't recognize. It was amended will, dated 7 months ago. It named my brother as sole beneficiary of the property, the savings accounts, and the contents of the house. My share was listed as 0. The signature at the bottom was my father's name, but the handwriting was wrong. It was shaky in the wrong places. My father's Parkinson's tremor ran along a specific axis, a lateral drift that his occupational therapist had documented. I had watched him sign checks, birthday cards, the discharge paperwork at the hospital. I knew what his signature looked like in the last year of his life. This wasn't it. The loops were too vertical, the pressure too even. Someone had practiced his signature but hadn't lived with it. I put the document down carefully, like it was made of something brittle, and I looked around the kitchen, at the calendars he still hung on the wall, at the ceramic rooster on the windowsill that had been there since I was 7. My brother hadn't just tried to cut me out. He had forged our dying father's signature on a legal document while I was driving back and forth to chemotherapy appointments and learning how to manage a feeding tube. The rage I felt in that moment was the cleanest thing I had ever experienced. I folded the forged will carefully, put it back in the folder, and placed it at the bottom of my overnight bag under a change of clothes. Then I drove to a copy shop 2 miles away and made 3 duplicates. One went into my glove compartment, one I photographed on my phone and emailed to myself. The third I sealed in an envelope and mailed to my own apartment. I was not going to let this become a story about a hysterical daughter making accusations. I was going to let it become a story about evidence. The thing about living in your parents' house for 8 months while your father is dying is that you become invisible to the technology in it. My father had installed a home security system 3 years ago after a string of car break-ins on the street. My brother had helped him set it up, came over one Saturday and spent 2 hours mounting cameras at the front door, the back door, and the driveway. He showed Dad how to check the footage on his tablet. What my brother did not know was that 6 months ago, after I noticed that 2 of my father's coin collection cases had moved from the study shelf to a box near the back door, I had added 2 cameras of my own. They were small, wide-angle, plugged into the power strip behind the bookshelf in the study and behind the television in the living room. I used a separate account, a different app, a cloud storage subscription billed to my personal email. My brother knew the existing system's login because he had created it. He did not know about mine. I sat in the parking lot of the copy shop and opened the app on my phone. The archive went back 90 days. I scrolled backward, looking for anything that happened in the weeks after my father's last hospital admission, when he had been too weak to leave the bedroom, and I had been staying at the house almost full time. I found it on a Tuesday night, 6 weeks before he died. The study footage showed my brother and his wife arriving at the house at 9:43 in the evening, after I had driven back to my apartment to shower and get a few hours of sleep. My father's nighttime aide, a quiet woman named Mrs. Okafor, was supposed to be there. In the video, my brother let himself in with his key, spoke briefly to Mrs. Okafor near the front door, and then she gathered her bag and left. He had sent her home early. My father was alone with them. My sister-in-law sat down at the desk and opened a folder. My brother went to the bedroom. He was in there for 11 minutes. When he came out, he was carrying a document, and my father was walking slowly behind him, one hand on the doorframe. My father sat in the armchair. He looked exhausted. His hands were in his lap. My sister-in-law slid papers across the coffee table and pointed to a line near the bottom. She was smiling. My brother crouched next to the armchair and said something close to my father's ear. My father picked up the pen. He looked at the paper for a long time, long enough that my brother put his hand over my father's hand. Not forcefully, not the way you'd grab someone, the way you'd guide a child. Steady pressure. A nudge. My father signed. My sister-in-law picked up the document and put it back in the folder before my father could look at it again. I watched that clip 4 times in the parking lot. By the last time, my hands had stopped shaking. I was past the shaking part. I was in the cold, focused place that comes after. I drove back to the house, went upstairs to the room I had been sleeping in, and lay on top of the covers with my shoes on, staring at the ceiling. I had the evidence. A video of my brother guiding a sick man's hand across a forged document while his wife smiled next to a lamp. I could take this to the police. I could file a complaint with the probate court. I could call the state attorney's office. But I had seen what happened when people filed complaints about family members. I had watched it unfold with a college friend whose aunt had drained her grandmother's accounts. The legal process takes years. The person you're accusing cries in court. The judge talks about the complexity of family dynamics. You spend $30,000 in legal fees and end up with a settlement that barely covers the theft. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted my brother to walk into a room thinking he had won and find out, in front of witnesses, that he had been wrong about everything. I needed him to do more than show the forged will. I needed him to act on it, publicly, irreversibly, in a setting where the consequences would be federal, not just civil. I called my father's estate attorney the next morning. Her name was Miss Caldwell, and she had represented my father for 14 years. She was in her mid-50s, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and had the unhurried manner of someone who had seen every version of every family fall apart and was no longer surprised by any of it. I brought the forged will, the original will, and my phone with the video footage. I sat across from her mahogany desk and laid everything out in the order I had found it. I didn't editorialize. I just showed her the documents side by side and then I played the clip. Miss Caldwell watched the video without speaking. When it ended, she took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. She said, "He had no idea what he was signing. He might have thought it was something routine," I said. His cognition was declining. They knew exactly when to come. She was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a folder I recognized immediately. It had my father's initials on the tab. "Your father updated his estate documents 8 months ago," she said. "Not his will, his trust." I hadn't known about a trust. She explained it the way Miss Caldwell explained everything, precisely and without drama. My father had come to her office on a Tuesday morning in October, alone, without telling anyone. He had been worried, she said. He'd noticed things going missing. He wasn't sure if he was imagining it. He wanted to make sure that whatever happened, the house didn't end up somewhere he hadn't chosen. He had established a revocable living trust and transferred the house title into it. The trust named my brother and me as co-beneficiaries. But there was a clause. She found the paragraph and slid the document across the desk so I could read it. Any beneficiary who attempts to transfer, encumber, sell, or otherwise alienate trust property prior to formal distribution shall be deemed to have disclaimed their beneficial interest in full. Upon such disclaimer, the disclaiming party's share transfers automatically to the remaining beneficiary. I read it twice. He put the house in a trust, I said. He did. So the deed my brother has, the one from the forged will, it's not a deed to the house. It's a deed to nothing. The house was already in the trust. The will doesn't control it. Correct, Miss Caldwell said. The will he forged is essentially meaningless with respect to the property. The trust supersedes it. But my brother doesn't know that. She looked at me steadily. He does not appear to. I leaned back in my chair. My father, who had spent 31 years anticipating structural failure before it happened, had seen this coming. He had quietly removed the asset from the board before anyone realized the game had changed. He had built his daughter a floor to stand on, and not told anyone it was there. He's already listed the house, I said. I found the listing online this morning. He's asking 1.4 million. I think he has a buyer. Miss Caldwell nodded slowly. If he goes through with the sale, I said, if he signs a purchase agreement and accepts earnest money, that's the moment he triggers the disclaimer clause. He loses his share. Everything transfers to me. That is correct. And if he wires funds or accepts payment under a fraudulent deed, that's not just a civil matter. Depending on the amount and the interstate nature of the transaction, she said carefully, it could constitute wire fraud. I looked at her. I don't want to stop the sale. Miss Caldwell was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. She reached into her desk again and pulled out a legal pad. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. We spent the next 2 hours working through it. We couldn't use a real buyer. I wasn't willing to let some family get tangled in a fraudulent title. Miss Caldwell had a solution for that. She occasionally worked with a real estate investment LLC, used by a client who conducted legitimate acquisitions, but also had experience operating discreetly in situations involving contested title. She said she could reach out. The entity would make an offer. An attractive one, enough to make my brother feel like he was winning. We drafted the inquiry email together. We kept the language corporate and slightly impatient, the tone of a buyer with capital and a deadline. We mentioned a 1031 exchange. That detail was important. A 1031 exchange requires a buyer to reinvest proceeds from a sold property within a strict IRS window. It explained the urgency. It made the cash offer feel like logistics, not desperation. Subject: Inquiry Residential Property, Elmwood Drive. Our acquisition team has identified the property as a potential fit for a client's 1031 exchange. We are prepared to move quickly. Cash offer. 48-hour close. Please advise on availability. Miss Caldwell sent it from the LLC's email address. Then we waited. My brother replied in 4 hours. He accepted the meeting. I drove back to the house that evening and sat in my father's chair in the study, the same chair I had watched him sign that document in, and I thought about how little my brother understood about the thing he thought he had taken. He thought he had the house. He thought the forged will gave him a deed, and the deed gave him ownership, and ownership gave him $1.4 million that he and his wife could use to disappear into the life they had been building in their heads. He had no idea the chair he was sitting in had already been pulled away. I slept better that night than I had in months. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday. Miss Caldwell arranged for it to take place at a title company downtown, a neutral space with a conference room and a notary on staff. The buyer's representative would be an attorney associated with the LLC, a man named Mr. Ellis, who had been briefed fully on the situation and knew exactly what his role was. I was not going to be in the room. Not at first. I parked on the street and watched from my car. My brother arrived 12 minutes early, which surprised me. He was usually late to everything. He was wearing a button-down shirt I didn't recognize, navy blue, the kind of thing you wear when you want to look like a responsible adult without trying too hard. His wife was with him. She had gotten her hair blown out. She was carrying a tote bag with a French word on it that I was fairly certain she had purchased specifically for this occasion. They walked into the building like they owned it, because they believed, in approximately 30 minutes, they would own $1.4 million, and the last of my father's things would be behind them. I put in one earbud. The room was wired. Mr. Ellis was wearing a small recording device. Miss Caldwell had arranged it through proper legal channels. I could hear the air conditioning, the sound of chairs, Mr. Ellis introducing himself. My brother's voice, looser than usual, doing that thing he does when he's nervous but trying to sound casual, where he talks slightly louder than necessary. We appreciate the quick turnaround, my brother said. The property's been well maintained. My father was very particular about upkeep. Mr. Ellis said something about the 1031 timeline. My brother said it wasn't a problem, they were motivated sellers. I looked at the oak tree in my mind, the one in the backyard, the one planted the year I was born. My father had told me once that he planted it because he wanted something on the property that would outlast him, something that didn't need anyone to agree on its value. It just grew. Through the earbud, the sound of documents sliding across a table. I'll need to confirm the title is clean, Mr. Ellis said. Any encumbrances, liens, competing claims to the property? None, my brother said. It transferred to me directly per my father's final will and testament. I have the deed. I heard the document land on the table. And the other heir? Mr. Ellis asked. I understand there was a daughter? My brother's pause was short, but it was there. She was left other assets. The house came to me. It's clearly documented. I see, Mr. Ellis said. He let a silence sit. Then, one more thing before we proceed. My client asks that I confirm there are no outstanding trust instruments on the property. Sometimes, with estates this size, there are revocable trusts that weren't fully collapsed before transfer. Another pause. Longer. There's no trust, my brother said. It's straightforward. Of course, Mr. Ellis said. I just need you to initial here confirming the property transfers free of any trust encumbrance. I heard the pen. I got out of the car. The lobby of the title company had marble floors and a receptionist behind a low desk. I told her I was there for the Elmwood Drive closing. She started to say something about the meeting already being in progress. I told her I was aware of that. Miss? Caldwell was 2 steps behind me, and the man beside her was not an attorney. He was a detective from the county fraud unit who had spent the last 4 days reviewing the video footage, the forged document, and the trust instrument with a forensic document examiner. We walked down the hall. Miss Caldwell opened the conference room door. My brother looked up and went very still. His wife made a sound that wasn't quite a word. The pen was in my brother's hand, hovering over the initialing line. He hadn't signed yet. He was about to. I sat down at the table. I looked at him the way you look at someone you have known your entire life and are seeing clearly for the first time. I thought you should know something before you initial that, I said. Dad put the house in a living trust 8 months ago. That deed you're holding doesn't convey title to anything. The trust does. And the trust has a clause. I placed a copy of the trust document on the table, the relevant paragraph highlighted. By attempting to sell the property, I continued, You've already triggered the disclaimer. Under the terms of the trust, your beneficial interest transferred to me the moment you listed it. Legally, you've been trying to sell me my own house. My brother's face moved through several things in quick succession. Confusion, then calculation, then something that looked almost like he was about to argue. His wife put her hand on his arm. That's not possible, he said. The will doesn't control trust property, Miss Caldwell said, which your father's estate attorney could have told you. If you had consulted her before you forged his signature in front of a camera, I watched him hear that word. Forged. I watched it land. We have footage, I said, from the study. The night you sent Mrs. O'Coffer home early. You guided his hand, Marcus? He didn't know what he was signing. I watched it 4 times. I've had 2 attorneys and a forensic examiner review it. The detective, who had been standing near the door without speaking, stepped forward and placed a card on the table. He said my brother's name. He said his wife's name. He said the word that changes the temperature of a room. Federal wire fraud. My sister-in-law's chair scraped back from the table. The detective said she could remain seated. She remained seated. My brother was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a name for. It wasn't just fear. It was something older than that. The look of someone who built an entire plan on the assumption that someone else wasn't paying attention. I don't understand, he said. Why didn't you just... He stopped. Just let you take it? I said. Because this isn't just about the house, Marcus. You went to his room at night when he was too weak to call me. You put a pen in his hand. He was scared of something in those last months. He told Miss Caldwell that he noticed things going missing. He just didn't want to believe it was you. I wasn't crying. I had thought I might when I imagined this moment. I wasn't. Dad built a floor for me before he left, I said. He knew. He didn't say anything to me because he didn't want me to spend his last weeks focused on this instead of on him. He just made sure I'd be standing on something solid when it was over. The meeting ended. The transfer was voided. The earnest money was frozen pending the investigation. My sister-in-law gave a statement that was longer and less coherent than it needed to be. My brother said very little. There is a specific kind of silence that belongs to people who have run out of the story they were telling themselves, and he had reached it. I signed the paperwork with Miss Caldwell that afternoon. The title was clarified, the trust distributed, the house formally transferred into my name. It took less time than I expected. I drove home in the late afternoon, the light going orange over the rooftops, and I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The oak tree was visible from where I parked, branches moving slightly in the wind, dark and patient against the pale sky. Inside, the house smelled like everything it had always smelled like. Coffee that had been brewed at some point and not quite cleared away. The cedar in the hall closet, the faint mineral smell of the old radiators. My father's reading glasses were still on the table next to his armchair, folded, waiting. I walked through every room slowly, the way you do when you need to remind yourself that a thing is real. The study with the bookshelves and the hidden camera still behind the row of engineering references. The kitchen with the ceramic rooster. The bedroom where the hospital bed had been and was now gone. The regular bed back in its place, made up with clean sheets by Mrs. Okafor, who had come back after I called her. I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. My father had not left me a letter. He was not a man who wrote things down unless they needed to be documented. What he had left me was a trust agreement with a clause he had chosen specifically, a legal mechanism designed to catch the hand of someone reaching for what wasn't theirs. He had sat in Miss Caldwell's office alone on a Tuesday morning and built a quiet, structural thing that would hold up long after he was gone, and he had never mentioned it to me because he needed me present with him in his last months, not braced for a fight. He had done what engineers do. He had accounted for the load. He had made sure the structure wouldn't fail. I went to the window and looked at the backyard, at the tree, at the roots I knew were there, even though I couldn't see them, deep and patient beneath the surface of everything. I thought about what it means to inherit something, not just the legal transfer of property, the actual thing, the way a person's particular way of solving a problem can pass from one generation to the next without either of them noticing it's happening. My father had never told me to be careful. He had never said watch out for this or protect yourself from that. He had just, quietly and without announcement, shown me what it looked like to think 3 steps ahead and keep records of everything. I was 31 years old, and I owned a house with an oak tree in the backyard that had been planted the year I was born. I walked to the kitchen and made coffee. Real coffee, the way my father liked it, dark and not sweet. I poured it into the mug he always used, the one with the small chip in the handle from some kitchen incident no one could remember anymore. I carried it to the armchair in the study, and I sat down and I drank it in the quiet of everything he had left behind. There is a version of this story where I confronted my brother the night he sent that text, where I called him and cried and accused him and gave him the chance to deny everything and hire a lawyer and turn it into a war that lasted 5 years. There is a version where I lost because I moved too fast and gave too much away. That is not the version that happened, because I learned it from someone who understood that the most important structures are the ones nobody sees until they need them. I didn't demolish anything. I just let my brother walk into a building he thought he owned and find out that the foundation had never been his to begin with. The coffee was good. Outside, the oak tree moved in the wind. The house was quiet, and it was mine.